Hey everyone, Himori here to talk to you a little bit about my feelings on tabletop role playing games, specifically when it comes to system, and why sometimes I ask people obnoxiously if they've ever played anything else. Now, I want to preface this by saying if you like D&D and you only play D&D, that is fine. There is nothing wrong with that. 5e, 3.5, I'm a big fan of Beckham BCMI myself personally. That is completely fine. Whatever you like, you like. But there are a lot of games in this hobby, and sometimes I realize people don't know how many there are. Now, I make some titles. Shout out, shameless plug. For example, I made Friendship Effort Victory. We Dig Giant Robots. We have Petmon in publishing, Wild Hunt in development, and others like Hunt for the Elder Gods, which is a little quick side project, and I'm working on the setting for Sidera. So I've made I work a little bit in the industry, though mostly as a hobby. It's definitely not something I can live off of, let me tell you that. But because of this, I keep a breadth of what other people are doing. You ever look at any of my products, you'll see that I always have this strange number of shout outs to other developers, and that is because I'm keeping track of who makes what. So when it comes to sort of this situation, I always wonder, does everyone know how many things are out there and how many different types of fans there are? So this is what this video is here really to address. There are a lot of games outside of D&D, Pathfinder, and the OSR, which I'm using that list because I was watching a video recently where someone defended their use of wine liking 5e, which fine, okay. I mean, maybe it sounds like he was getting shit in the comments, so I get it. I actually think that ever since the OGL Crisis, this topic has become a bit more, how can I put it, lost its original meaning. But they kept just saying D&D, Pathfinder, OSR, and in my head I'm just like, he doesn't know there's other games, right? That's what spurred this discussion. So there are, like, in my opinion, two axes when it comes to what kind of games you might be into. Because there are people who play by genre and people who play by mechanics, and both and neither. I guess there's some people just go by vibe or whatever the GM's running. Let's start with genre. Now, of course, you're going to hear fantasy. That is like the thing you're probably most familiar with. Probably there are some of you who think the only thing is fantasy. It ain't, trust me. There's science fiction, superhero, horror. Yeah, there's horror. Dread is an amazing game. Uses Jenga for its resolution mechanic. And when you think about it and you think about it being horror, it makes sense, don't it? And they're just all these different genres. Now, let's talk about them a little bit. There are some people who are just hardcore sci-fi people, whether they eat and breathe Traveler, or they love Eclipse Phase, or they just can't get enough of oh, what's another sci-fi game? Stars Without Numbers. Um, you know, it's not my cup of tea, hence why I'm having some trouble giving examples. But there are some people who just love sci-fi games. They're all about the science fiction games, so they're looking for sci-fi games all the time. Another popular genre is the superhero genre. I've actually, since I've been recently playing Mutants and, well, I wasn't able to find a group, but I was setting up some stuff for a campaign in Mutants and Masterminds and Prowlers and Paragons. I found communities of people where all they do is play superhero role-playing games, and to them, tabletop role-playing games are just a means of them fulfilling their superhero fan fictions. My personal favorite, Marvel Heroic Role-Playing, and I also know an entire community that is in love with Masks: A New Generation. This is just a popular genre, very common. Now, I mentioned horror and I mentioned dread. Some people are all here for the ooky and the spooky and the scary. This genre is much less fed, but it's depending on what you say. You know, you got Delta Green, for example. Unknown Armies is more horror, supernatural. Now, do the World of Darkness ones count in here? I would put them here, though whether or not they succeed at being horror kind of depends on which one we're talking about here. They are intended, though, to be horror, the kind of existential horror about losing your humanity and becoming a monster. In a way, considering that for a while, World of Darkness had actually eclipsed D&D when TSR went under in sales and popularity, and the 1990s was pretty much dominated. If we're going to be honest, dominated by the World of Darkness fans. This might technically be the most popular genre. I said it was the least most popular genre, but then I remember World of Darkness counts, and that eclipsed D&D. And until Pathfinder came about, people considered it the main competitor that D&D was fighting. Yeah, fun fact. Which is why it was such a big deal when White Wolf, the people who own World of Darkness, made things like what they called Sword and Sorcery, which was their fantasy game. Exalted was better. Or they made oh my god, or they made Monty Cook's World of Darkness. Don't if you want to laugh, look that up. No offense to Monty Cook, but he was not cooking that day, let me tell you. But these are people who go by genre, and there are more genres. They're more niche. I mentioned Petmon. That's something I've been working in recently, which is the pet collector genre. Your Animon stories. You got kids only games like Kids on Bike, kind of a genre. Kids adventure kind of stuff. These smaller genres, but they're not as big. But they exist. And there are people who just play in those genres, or they just like playing in those genres. Now, the second axis is mechanical, and there's more genres, like I said. The second axis is mechanics. So when it comes to mechanics, you of course have the GNS theory, gamist, simulationist, narrativist, and I'm going to play into that a little bit, but there's more to it than just that. Because even when we talk about mechanics, there's different things. So what I mean is, there are people who are just into games for the narrative, so they might want to play something like PBTA, Powered by the Apocalypse, an engine by Meg and Vincent Baker that is all about narrative and reinforcing narrative conceits in the game. But then there are people who are all about simulation, and they're going to go and they're going to get Burning Wheel, which I think they're actually still having a sale on Burning Wheel books. Check on the website. It is unnecessarily detailed to actually attempt to try to do a fantasy role-playing game. I mean, if we're going to be honest, like the part I've ran it once with the idea being that it was a Renaissance Italy where elves showed up and they were playing the elves. That skill list though, man, over 100 skills. But some people would love that. Some people that's all they want. And there's another axis here though. You have crunch levels. Some people want a narrative game, but they want a heavy crunch. They want a lot of things going on. What's a heavy crunch narrative game? Do you think Chubo's Mara's wish granting engine would count? It's definitely on the heavier side. Exalted might count. It's definitely a game that focuses on the narrative over most other elements. And then there are people who want lighter ones. I already mentioned PBTA. I can't think of a rules light simulationist game, but I'm sure I guess basic GURPS might maybe. Like when you don't use all the handbooks so that you don't have to account for the curvature of the earth when you shoot a sniper rifle. Look that up. So that's there's more layers to it. So I mean, I'm trying to simplify it into two axes, but there's layers to it. Because there are some people when we're talking about this with mechanics, you ever like see those things where it's like, here's a bunch of one-page RPGs or here's lasers and feelings. Yeah, there's some people who that's all they want because they're mainly just in it for like 5-second quick little dinner party things. Nothing else. So they're not really in this thing for how can I put this? They want it light. They want it one page. That's the people. There's a guy who just back in the day just would do this. I think he's on Blue Sky now, but back in the day would just do a different one-page RPG for Twitter every day. And there's a community that just plays those. Shout out to everyone is John. A little bit of an ableist game, but it was fun back in the day. Oh, rules medium. I just realized narrative game would probably be Cortex Prime. I just thought of an example right there. So there's crunch levels, there's, complexity, length. Because to be honest, there was a while where I remember older gamers saying part of the reason they were doing the OSR was partially because games like 3.5 and 4E was just too much for them to do while having kids and being in the middle age, which honestly speaking, now that I've hit my 30s, I kind of get it. I kind of get it, guys. But anyway, back to the game itself. So there's these factors when it comes to length, complexity, but those are the axes, I think, the mechanical draw, people who are drawn in by mechanics, people who are drawn in by genre. And that is a factor here. So you can find a bunch of games if you look for these different communities. You don't just have to limit yourself to the fantasy tactical combat stuff, which is what D&D is. It's a fantasy tactical combat game. Now, if you're aware of all this already and you're saying, yeah, I know all that, I like this, well, then fine. Forget what I said. But I'm just saying, sometimes when people are like, did you play another game? We're also wondering, like, did you play something else? Oh, I almost forgot of one other thing. This technically is another genre, but it's a very big one, and I can't believe I forgot. People who will only play licensed settings, whether that's Star Wars, literally every system in the world, I think at this point, has a Star Wars hack. Whenever a new generic system comes out, there's a Star Wars hack. Every single time. Every D&D, there's a Star Wars hack for it after, I think, 3.5. I'm sure there's a 4A Star Wars hack. Like, it's just that pervasive. Even though that wasn't that popular of an edition, even though I'm a defender of it, there always is. Star Wars hack's like the most common thing. But, you got other stuff. Warhammer's technically a licensed setting, because it's really a miniatures game. My Little Pony actually had a few good ones. Not the ones by Renegade, those are... but the ones that the person behind Animon's Story made, those actually apparently were really good. I mean, speaking of Renegade, I auditioned to be in a Power Rangers game using the Renegade system, even though personally I prefer Henshin. So, some people just play that, though, even though there's other Super Sentais, because license is the first thing they go to. Some people only play for licensed stuff. But the point that we usually try to say is that, there's all these things out here. You don't have to disdain fantasy and attack. Now, you can if you want. But sometimes with the way you talk, if you ever wonder why we say this, is the way you talk, we're like, you do know there's other options, though, right? Because this is I sometimes say this as a developer, it's an oversaturated market because games never go, I think I said this earlier, but games never go obsolete. I mentioned I like BCMI. That is from the 70s, and I still play it occasionally. Because you know what? My copy of Rule Cyclopedia D&D still works. I don't have to, I actually do have a Nintendo Entertainment System, but I don't have to worry about outdated console hardware or getting compatibility mode with Windows 95 or something like that. It works because it's just a book. The only thing that makes old games go away is if the game is out of print, but between, and reprints, that never really happens anymore. We haven't even gotten into retro clones, and they're now making retro clones of games from 2010, for God's sake. I know, it's over 10 years. I know. Recently, we were having a discussion in the OSR subreddit about 4E retro clones, and at one point I had to remind people who were saying, like, 4E is not old. 4th edition is 17 years old. In 1 year, 4th edition could legally vote if it were a person. So it's almost retro. I think retro is 20 years. So in 3 years, it'd be officially retro. Yeah, I know, right? 3rd edition is retro. It's 23 years old. But anyway, the point is, these games never go out of style. So you could play so many things. And it's not that we're saying you can't or that you shouldn't. We're just wondering, like, you do know, like, because sometimes it feels like the discussion gets stuck with mainly 5e or Pathfinder or the OSR. Which, listen, my favorite OSR game is Dungeon Crawl Classics. Pathfinder 2e, I like it. I was part of that community. And I'm running a 5e game on Saturdays, so I like 5e. But there are just other stuff. And so sometimes we're just like, we hear you guys complain about things and we're like, there are other options. Now, to go back to that video, he at one point said that they say play this perfect game, but they can't agree on what the perfect game is. That's because we're not saying there's no such thing as a perfect game. My favorite F20 game, Fantasy D20 game, is 13th Age. And I have tons of problems with it. There's no perfect game. I could tell you 1,000 problems with Friendship Ever Victory and We Dig Giant Robots, and I made those games and release them. And I know there's 1,000 problems. I probably know more problems about them than anyone else because I made them. It's a thing when you develop stuff. You remember all the problems. The point is, we're not saying a perfect game. We're just saying, can you find the game that might fit you better if you're complaining about these things? Maybe you do have the best fit, because I did say you can find 1,000 problems. But with how you discuss things, sometimes we're just left thinking, if you're wondering how the other side of the hobby views it, you guys know that there are other things, because I had sort of a unique situation here, I did not get in with D&D. I first played because my roommate in college basically was playtesting a game called Legends D20 by Rule of Cool, which was one of the many games trying to take the D&D from in the 2010s. They needed an extra player for the playtest, and I was in the room, so I was there. The game wasn't. The game system itself, actually, I think is great, and it's unfortunate that it never went anywhere. Ignore that hand tracking breaking. Um, yeah, it's a long story. Never got finished. They're kind of fans finished it for them, but there's no official monster manual, which really hurts the game. Thankfully, fans made one. But I got a really good friendship out of that with Lady Mappy being in the game there, and got really into this hobby, which I've been. God, that was 2011, 2025. That is 13 years of playing games. I got a pretty lifelong hobby out of it, or at least how it seems so far. I didn't come in with D&D, and I actually did not play a D&D for a very long time until Lady Mappy wanted to run 3.5 for us, and I played a Dread Macromancer because it was a tier 3 game. There's a whole story there. Never let your psionics player get infinite power points. Just know that. It wasn't me, obviously, because I'm playing a Dread Necromancer. But until then, I didn't play it, And a lot of stuff, I didn't even play that much of it, I like it, but I didn't play a ton of it, I would later play more of it, but after that, I went into a bunch of other stuff. And when 5e came out, I never jived with it because I was busy. I was deep up my own rear end in PBTA, which was an engine I became obsessed with for like 2 years. I was like that guy, you know what I mean? I never got like tied to one of them. So I've been playing tons of different games, which is actually the funny thing about me returning to D&D space recently for my Saturday game is that I end up just saying things and people are like, what are you talking about? Now, some of that is because I misremember stuff. 5-foot steps are not a thing in 5e, by the way. It's now the disengage action. I'm an idiot. But also just be like, oh yeah, you know, I mentioned offhand, like, oh yeah, what was it? Oh, it used to be a thing that fighters would have, supernatural abilities. So it's kind of weird that people ignore that. Like, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, you see, me and my friend from the Philippines played first edition advanced, which is true, by the way, once. And I had a fighter who just barely started to get exceptional strength, and I could bend bars and lift gates, and I had a keep, and I reached name level. And I started to have an army, and I got known as the Liberator because I went John Brown when the DM introduced slavery into the setting. John Brown means I started killing slave owners. So I got known as the Liberator. But, nobles hated me. But, they're like, oh, you played that. I'm like, yeah, I did. Or I'll just casually mention, like, oh, yeah, this. And they're like, what is that from? I'm like, oh, it's from when I ran Vampire the Masker. No, it was Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition for a room full of Goths. Which went okay, but I had trouble with the condition system. Oh, what's this from? Oh, it's when I ran Exalted 3rd edition. Oh, this is when I played in Chuba's Marvelous Wish Granting engine. Oh, this is when I, and it's like, sometimes like, what the fuck are you talking? It's not like that Jesse, what the fuck are you talking about meme from Breaking Bad. They're just like, what are you talking about? Oh yeah, I did it's when I played Warhammer in a convention game. It's when I was playing Fantasy Flight Star Wars. I ran that like a ton of times. I was really into the Fantasy Flight Star Wars system, actually. Big fan of that. Shout out to D20 Radio and wasn't System Mastery. That's another good podcast. What was their Star Wars podcast? I can't remember. But they still run and they're great. They have Sam Witwer on a lot. But anyway, point is like they're like, what are you talking about? And so it sometimes makes me think like there's a ton of games out there, guys. If you want to ever check them out, just go to Drive-Thru RPG, Indie Press Revolution, itch.io, or what's another good site to buy? Lulu, technically. A lot of them print for Lulu. But, or you can go to rpg.net, make a thread there. It's probably going to be better response than Reddit. Be honest. You just get exposed to tons of games. And I'm not saying you have to abandon D&D. I'm still playing it. Like I said, I recently returned to that sphere. It's just that we always say this because we're like, did you know there's tons of other stuff, even within the fantasy tactical role playing sphere? Maybe Beacon will really be your shit. Who knows? Maybe you'll really just like Ironclaw. Maybe you're secretly a furry. Who knows? Ironclaw is actually awesome. And I'm not even a furry. I swear to God. I swear. Why are you giving me that look? But maybe it turns out you're really into sci-fi games, or maybe this whole time you just would love superhero stuff, and Mutants and Masterminds hits that itch. It might actually be a good place to start because it turns out you just love D&D stuff, and Mutants and Masterminds is really just D&D superheroes. Who knows? You never know until you try it. And the thing is, a lot of these games are actually inexpensive, either because they're on an open license, or most role-playing games digitally run up for about $10. There's actually been a lot of discussion amongst developers about how much we undersell ourselves, and you can take advantage of our lack of self-respect for now. uh, I'm quoting someone about it when they said we should raise our prices. I mean, they weren't entirely wrong. I'm so afraid of setting right prices on stuff, so maybe it is a lack of self-respect. Who knows? Maybe he's right, but you know, you can take advantage of that to get a lot of good games for very cheap, and that's not even counting for all the free games, of which there are many. And remember, some games even have free versions. Like Kevin Crawford will release a free version of his games that you can later pay for in the deluxe versions. Or there's always pay what you want. And every pay what you want place allows you to do $0 and lets you take the thing out. And then if you like it, you can come back and pay for it. Eclipse Phase First Edition wanted to prove a point and put the entire game out for free under the belief that people would buy the stuff they like if it was good. And I own a hardcover copy of Eclipse Phase 1E. So, what do you think? They were right. So, you could take advantage of this, and you don't have to do a forever game. You could buy a game for $10, which is as cheap as a Steam sale, and then run a one shot with your group. And maybe they jive with it, or maybe they hate it. Maybe, personally, I've already told my group that for Halloween, we're probably going to do Alien Evolved Edition, because you're going to get a backer PDF immediately after the Kickstarter campaign for Halloween, because I want to do the official Alien art. So there was this little issue with the model there. But the point is, some people just want to try these other things. You never know. And you can just do a one shot. You don't have to commit. So, just an option, just something that's available. So when we discuss these things, it's just because sometimes we just wonder, if there's something else you could do that might end up being a better fit for you. No commitment, low price. There's no commitment. It could be very inexpensive, and you never know. You might find something that could be your new thing, or maybe it's something you don't like. Who's to say? I've played tons of games. Right now, I'm in a Monster Hearts game on Tuesday, an Animon game I run on Thursday. I play a playtest of Strike 2nd Edition on Friday. Saturday, I run 5e. You never know. Sometimes doing different things could be worth it. Or maybe you just prefer 5e at the end. And hell, maybe you don't want to do this at all. But it was just a suggestion and why we say these things. We have to cut this a little short because of the tracker dying, but thank you for your time. And I don't know how you end YouTube videos. So I'm just going to awkwardly stare at you while I turn off the camera.